Hello and a very warm welcome to today's seminar. It's brought to you today by Avetta, a partnership with Avetta, and Avetta have been a massive supporters of CIPS for many years. And in the chat facility a little bit later on, I'll put a link to some of their really great content. So, a content partner for CIPS. So there's loads of resources there that to help you with lots of different aspects of your procurement team. So today's subject, we're here to talk about cybersecurity, and we've got a great lineup for you. This session will be recorded and be available for you to watch again or share with your colleagues next week. And it's part of a series of seminars. We've got 3 that we're doing in conjunction with Avetta. So cybersecurity today will be on the 13th of May, building resilience, and the 24th of June, managing modern slavery. And we'll send out more information on that, and there'll be a link in the chat at the end of this session as well. So look, we want to make these session as interactive as possible. So please submit your questions to our panel through the Q&A facility here. Chat with some of your colleagues or make new connections in the chat. Quite often, lots of people connect with each other on LinkedIn afterwards. So it's a really great way to network with people while we're all largely still working remotely. So please make this as interactive as possible. So I think that's it for my housekeeping. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Michael Leary, who is cybersecurity engineer at Avetta. So I'm going to have a quick chat with Michael now, and then we will follow on with a panel discussion with some of our speakers. So really get ready with those questions and submit them into the chat facility, and I'll help facilitate some of that a little bit later on. So Michael, thank you very much for joining us. And I know it's very, very early where you are. You're joining us from the US. It's 5 a.m. So you've really taken one for the team. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for sharing your insights today. So tell me a little bit about your role at Avetta and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a cybersecurity engineer, and my job is just to make sure we are doing everything we need to not end up in the newspaper in a bad way, making sure everything's secure and that we're handling our customers' data safely and soundly.
Excellent. And I know that Avetta can help a lot of clients as well with some regulatory and compliance assistance, and that really helps in this space. So can you let us know a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so Avetta's whole job is to help handle supplier compliance and regulatory requirements. And so if you work with third parties and suppliers and have a hard time balancing all of their contracts and compliance issues and regulatory requirements, that's where Avetta comes in. We can load all your suppliers into a dashboard, and you can see just very simply and cleanly that which ones are compliant, which ones are not. And then on the flip side, if they're not compliant, maybe their documents are expired or something, we can go in and also help them become compliant. And so it's a really unique situation for us to be able to help both sides of the party.
Absolutely, and having that visibility as well at your fingertips is really important. So that's great. And before we go on to our panel discussion, can you let us know some of the trends that you're seeing in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, and I hopefully catered to a wide range of people. I know, in these meetings you have really technical and not technical, so hopefully it's on a level that everyone can understand. But a lot of my data is going to come from Verizon's annual report that they publish called the Data Breach Investigations Report, or the DBIR. And they actually investigate a lot of breaches, and then they aggregate all that data into very useful information for people like me and for people who want to know more about how their industry is at risk and what they can do to help prevent becoming a victim. So the first thing I want to talk about is who are these bad actors? And according to the report, 70% of breaches come from external sources. And that seems like a lot, but that also means that 30% are internal actors. And I know from personal experience that not all of these internal actors are intentionally helping or intentionally compromising companies. And it's kind of unique because a lot of them are being tricked by groups of organized crime to help them get monetary gain out of the company. And I think that leads us to why is this happening. And I mentioned monetary gain is the number one reason. about 80% of attacks are specifically designed to gain money. That leaves about 20%, and almost all of that 20% is espionage. So you really have two major reasons why people attack companies, and that helps us kind of understand where our risks are at.
Yeah, and I think personally, through the pandemic, I mean, I've seen quite a lot of things that try and dupe you into stuff. So I guess the everyone working remotely and everyone being caught off guard with the pandemic probably raises the risks a little bit more for us all.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up, because when we look at what is being compromised, 40% of the cyber attacks end up happening because of web applications, but 30% is because a desktop or a laptop is compromised. In a business, we have our security umbrella, and when everyone's working remote and all of our applications are in the cloud, that umbrella's hard to cover all of the different assets. And so between those two, that makes up 70% of the attacks. 10% is kind of one-offs, but the other 20% is email and compromised email servers. And you see a lot of that with business email compromise. So that kind of leads into the trends of what we're seeing. Every year in the Verizon report, they talk about what are the number one, number two types of attacks. And this year and last year, phishing took spot number one, which is probably not a surprise to a lot of you. Stolen credentials took spot number two. As you see these huge breaches and these passwords being kind of consolidated, it's really easy for a hacker to take a username and a password and try it on 100 different applications or different websites. Yeah. And it's really easy for an attacker to find a working username and password for Netflix, for banking, for anything. And so that's, you see that is in spot number two. And that's the second year that it's in spot number two. And I think in the next couple of weeks, we'll see the 2021 report, and I'm sure phishing will be one and credentials will be number two.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see, won't it?
Yeah. And then number three is errors. And basically that just means things like missed delivery. So if you're typing an email and you attach a sensitive document, which you shouldn't do anyway, but if you email Jane a document and then you hit send and realize that wasn't a Jane in your company, that was a Jane that you had interacted with 6 months ago, that's a form of compromise, and it's kind of embarrassing, and it's hopefully a little bit easier to clean up, but it's still something that it's ranked number three, so something to be aware of. On top of that is things like misconfiguration. If IT sets up a server and forgets to change the default password, that's a really easy way for an attacker to get in.
Yeah, excellent.
So that's basically what I had to share with that. And if you haven't heard of that report, it's definitely something to look into a little bit more.
Yeah, maybe we'll dig that out and share it in the chat. That would be really good. Right, let's open up this conversation to our panelists. So thank you, Michael, for those insights. So I'm just going to hand over now to Kerry Jones from Supply Management, who's going to facilitate the panel, and then I will be back at the end to give you some more information and to close this seminar off today. So Kerry, over to you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and thanks for the introduction. I think it's such a weighty subject. It's hard to get a grip on it for many companies at the moment, especially as you're saying, people are pivoting towards more use of cloud and more embracing lots of different technologies quite quickly. So Michael, thank you very much for joining us so early. Michael's going to be part of our panel. And we also have with us Andrew Gould, who is Detective Chief Superintendent and National Cybercrime Program Lead for the NPPC, the National Police Chiefs Council. We also have Amelle Mestari, Director of Procurement at Bouygues Energies and Services. So yeah, thank you all. If I kick off, bearing in mind what Michael actually introduced, those wider trends and what's going on in the large scheme of things. But have you noticed any trends in your sectors specifically? And Amelle, what's been going on in energies and services?
Thank you very much for having me today. Yeah. So for us, in fact, it's more about the business email compromise that, as Michael mentioned, is one of our main threats at the moment, leading to fraud attempts. And most of the time, I guess companies have gaps in their technical control and not enough technical expertise to secure properly their cloud platform. And business email compromised also makes the exercise of spotting a fish much more difficult for the users. And therefore, we must rely on strong internal processes to avoid falling for those frauds. The other item is Office 365. 365 is a great tool. However, it is very easy to hack without the right controls in place, like the MFA, so the multi-factor authentication, which is something that we're trying to install on most of our programs. And a very basic phishing attack can disturb operations, and it has for us last year, and impact our supply chain image and also ours with our clients.
Are some of those quite new? Are they new trends that you're seeing?
Yes, they are, definitely. And in the fact that we're working more, as Emma mentioned earlier on, in our houses, and the technology has changed quite a lot too.
Absolutely. And how about you, Andrew? What's specific to your sector?
Well, I guess it's probably less so specific to our sector, but I think certainly what we see in terms of what victims are reporting and organisations are coming forward in terms of asking for help. I mean, I would agree with everything that Michael and Amelle have already raised. And I think the Verizon report is actually a really good open source assessment of kind of what organisations can face globally. It's a really good start for 10, particularly if you're kind of starting out on that cybersecurity journey. I think from our kind of sense of what we see, the biggest kind of trends and certainly the biggest threats are the kind of the clear focus on ransomware in terms of the organised crime groups. The malware itself is becoming more complex and more challenging, and what I mean by that is it's just cleverer and better in the way that kind of software developers are developing and improving stuff all the time for good, but the criminals are doing exactly the same. So as we bring in new defenses, they try and identify new ways of working around them. It is an arms race, but also what's actually quite technically impressive, dare I say it, with some of the current ransomware strains, is the capability within the ransomware. It can do a lot more stuff. Basically, it can go different places, has a higher level of functionality than we've seen in the past, and ultimately it's a lot more or can be a lot more disruptive and a lot more damaging. It seems like the disruptive impact is greater than it has been previously. It also, the malware generally hides itself better as well. There'll be a lot of activity on a victim organization's network, and ransomware will almost be the last thing often that the organised crime group will do. It'll be the first thing you might see as an organisation, but they'll have done everything else that they wanted to do before that. That's almost kind of the calling card as they walk out the back door. You know, who knows what data or other material they've taken or other disruption they've caused, because the ransomware is a great distraction, and also it's the final revenue raiser as they leave if organisations choose to pay that extortion. And often we know that they have no choice if they've got ineffective backups, which is a very, very common fault and common problem. We also find the organised crime groups themselves becoming much more confrontational. So in the last year, the sums they're demanding have grown. We're seeing demands paid for millions and millions of pounds, individual victims. So that the sums are going up, and also they're much more confrontational in the demands. So you'll have a lot more threatening behaviour, a lot more threats to post material on the dark web or the clear web, contact customers or other key individuals, more publicity, obviously to encourage people to pay. But even when people are paying, there's no guarantee they'll get access back, or they'll get the data back, or they won't get stuff posted anyway. So it's definitely becoming more confrontational. It's also we see a trend to ransomware as a service. So you've got these kind of developers or organised crime groups that have got their different levels of capability in terms of the malware itself, but they'll then sell it to third parties that they've got no real relationship with, Those third-party criminals will have varying levels of technical capability themselves, but they might tweak it a bit, or they might just use it and deploy it. So they'll be a lot less technically sophisticated, but you can buy it, use it. There's lots of different criminal services you can kind of buy, as you would as a normal business. These people are generally business people, apart from the hostile states. So they're just finding ways to kind of share their product and monetize it. So you have actually often some quite unskilled people. There is this kind of view that, gosh, hackers and cybercrime, hugely technically sophisticated, aren't they all very clever? And at the top end, yeah, absolutely right, they are. But actually, for an awful lot, no, they're not. They're using tools that are readily downloadable from the internet, almost fire and forget, don't take any real technical skill to utilize and deploy. Watch a few tutorials on YouTube how to use them, and they're up and running as a little cybercrime individual or group. Now, actually, those individuals are much easier to investigate, much easier to catch, because their tradecraft's not as good. And one of the final trends we've seen kind of during the pandemic is, as more and more organizations have been forced to work from home, that big rush to maintain business as usual as we've all kind of left the office has created a whole new load of vulnerabilities, although actually most organizations have done a brilliant job in managing that and kind of doing the security catch-ups to fix, but there's still an extra level of risk there. Those criminals were working from home as well. Actually, probably particularly in the first few months, the most compliant group within lockdown were the criminals. You just didn't, they were just not out and about on the streets. They weren't, doing what they were usually doing. A lot of criminal activity stopped for 3 or 4 months, particularly at the top end, which is really, really interesting. You've got some of the scariest, most capable criminals in the country not leaving their houses, not doing crime. It was bizarre.
That's amazing.
That's sadly all changed now. But anyway, but you find a lot of criminals that don't have a background in technology or committing these kind of crimes moving out of traditional crime types and trying to get into cybercrime during the pandemic. So that increases the volumes and the challenge for organizations to protect themselves. But actually, these are less sophisticated actors, which give us quite a lot of investigative opportunity to disrupt, identify, arrest. So that's the kind of the negative trend. But on the positive side, the levels of global law enforcement cooperation massively increasing to a really impressive level. And in fact, actually, countries that don't traditionally cooperate, it's like it's got so bad, lots of countries have decided, right, stop, enough, we need to change our approach. So there's some quite interesting stuff going on internationally, but also domestically. Government have really invested in improving the capability and capacity of UK policing. I mean, that's my full-time job. I run the cybercrime program, building the force and the regional teams to be much more capable. So we've gone from a position a couple of years ago of probably making a handful of arrests a year in this space. Now, last year it was about 500, and it'll be even more this year. So as more teams have come online and have become more capable, this is a global and international crime, but it's also local crime. There are plenty of local British-based cyber criminals for us to get our teeth into, and there's an awful lot of stuff going on internationally as well. So it's by no means impossible to tackle, but we're not going to rest our way out of it. But the very simple final message is, it's boring, but it's basic. But those basic controls solve 80 to 90% of this problem. Strong passwords, two-factor authentication, like Amelle said, patching, all those kind of basics, and backups. Backups is the number one priority of everything, has to be, in my view. That fixes the vast majority of this. It's not as complicated as, I think we make it more complicated than it needs to be. The technology is complicated, but the risks are simple to understand. And if the board gets it and your senior leaders get it and want to invest in it, actually, we can do this. It is not as difficult as people think it is.
It sounds like we're up against some very entrepreneurial criminals then. I guess
exactly.
their roles in the game are changing as well.
Exactly.
So Michael, does that fit in with some of the trends that you're seeing? So if we're seeing how it is applied to these specific areas, does that match? Yeah,
it is. It matches very well. Malware kind of, it used to be climbing in the ranks, but ransomware, which is kind of a subset of malware, ransomware is a subset of malware, sorry, has kind of become its own class now. And as Andrew said, it's really a race to arms. Initially you saw them demand money, and if you didn't have backups, you paid the ransom. And then I know in the US, the FBI said, don't pay the ransom, start getting backups. And so companies got better at backups, but the hackers when they weren't getting paid, they said, well, we're going to start stealing your data first and then encrypt it. And then if you don't pay us, we're going to disclose it to the public. And so now they have this leverage that most companies can't just say, I'm not going to pay you, because even if they have backups now, their data's gone to the hackers, and a lot of it's sensitive data. And so it puts us in a really hard spot. And so I think it does come back to those basic controls to take care of your system. And it's really hard, especially if you don't have, board buy-in, but it's becoming such a pandemic in and of itself that I think a lot of people are ready to put money where it needs to go to help keep our businesses safe.
Mm-hmm. But you mentioned a couple of times about the basic controls and just getting those nuts and bolts areas right. But when it comes to spotting and identifying those risks, like how can you predict where those risks are coming from? How easy is that? Andrew?
It's a really good question. So I think there's probably two elements to it. On the slightly kind of facile, because I don't have to manage it for my organization, thank goodness, side of it, actually there's an element of it, I would say, kind of maybe a little flippantly, it's quite easy, actually. We know what the general vulnerability areas are within our organizations. We should know within our organization, we should be able to understand our business, right? So we should understand what our most important areas of data are, or our most important services. What are the most important things? What are the crown jewels of the organization? What business as usual must we maintain at all costs? Because once you can kind of prioritize the stuff you do in terms of maintaining that delivery, well, then you can start to think about what the disruptive impact will be. That helps you kind of decide your risks and how you want to potentially manage that. So you understand your business. You also know kind of what's happening there, whether it's from Verizon or other sources. You know what people are doing. The challenge is, so it's kind of, phishing is always the biggest volume. The kind of the CEO or the mandate frauds, they're not particularly technically they're not particularly sophisticated cyber crimes to do, but actually, as Amelle said, if you get your internal processes right, so somebody picks up the phone to a supplier or the CEO to say, did you send that email? Did you really want me to do that? That doesn't cost you any money. That's a process and culture issue. That saves an organization. I've seen 5 million quid walk out of a company in an afternoon just through lack of conversation within an office. Well, now you can't even have that conversation within an office because we're all working from home. That is a process and culture issue. That is not a technology issue. So that makes it actually relatively cheap to fix. But you do need those technical controls as well. Well, that's the number one risk, because actually that successful phishing attack can enable so many other attacks once they're within. And maybe if you've clicked on that link, that bit of malware is now lurking. Who knows what that's going to do? You know that ransomware is going to have if you get hit by that, however it ends up in your system, that is going to have a catastrophic effect on your organization. If you have a data breach, exfiltration and extortion, that's bad. Clearly that's bad. But actually the day-to-day business runs on fine. The customers don't know, your shareholders don't know until it becomes public. If you can't deliver your service suddenly, instantly, then that's far more damaging. So how are you going to deal with a ransomware attack on your different systems or servers? And then you can start to prioritize, and then that's focusing on backup. So maybe we need to start there before we look at some of the other areas. So there's always a bit of technology, there's always a bit of people and training, and there's always a bit of process. And from a basic risk management point of view, if you're kind of identifying what your priorities are in terms of protection, and then you're thinking about how they may be compromised, that's when it gets really complicated. The how bit is tricky. What kind of, how do I need to configure stuff and protect stuff? Right, that's the really challenging and tricky bit, and I'm not kind of underestimating the scale of the challenge in that place. But big picture prioritization, I think that's quite straightforward. And in terms of a risk management matrix at a very basic level, you're just thinking about, well, so what's the likelihood of this thing happening, and what's the impact going to be? So likelihood times risk. You give it a 1 to 5 for likelihood, a 1 to 5 for impact, and there you go. You've got a prioritization risk management matrix at a basic level that at least starts you helping to think about what you need to be protecting, and then making an assessment of are we roughly in the right place around that? What are our gaps? And then you can go out if you need that specialist expertise. There are plenty of really good organizations out there who can help you come up with a more detailed plan around what you need to prioritize and how to mitigate that. So for example, in policing, we've launched something called the Police Cyber Alarm, which is for any UK organization, but it's SME focused. And basically that's a bit of software that you download. It sits on your external firewall and it starts to capture all the suspicious activity data of kind of what's hitting you in your organization. That gets shared with us. So effectively we start to crowdsource the UK, the local kind of domestic UK threat picture, and we will move to a position where the alarm will vulnerability scan your organization, so you'll get regular reports around what your vulnerabilities are. But we'll also move to a position where that's giving you kind of lifetime automated alerts as well. So when we've got indicators of compromise in other areas and risks that your firewall's not identifying, but we are, then we'll be able to kind of tell you this is something you need to look at. So there's the alarm as a free tool for SMEs. We've also got something that we call the regional cyber resilience centres across the whole of the UK. And that's about making cybersecurity advice more accessible for those SMEs and micro businesses that otherwise can't afford to access the industry. So the industry's brilliant in the UK. There's some amazing companies doing some really cool stuff, but most SMEs or micro businesses, they don't understand the risks, they don't understand what they need, and they don't know where to start. So who would they go and talk to? They're kind of scared. So it's kind of head in the sand stuff. So the idea of the centres they're kind of police sponsored, police endorsed. You can go and have that start for 10 almost benchmarking exercise of what you need, and then move out into the industry as a more intelligent consumer. And we also work with students, like properly trained and supervised students, but the students will do that 2 or 3 days worth of consultancy work with those businesses much cheaper than the industry to help them make that assessment, so then they can go forward into the industry as those kind of intelligent consumers. So and even more simply than that, look at the National Cybersecurity website, thinking about procurement. Some of the guidance they've got on there around intelligent procurement from a cybersecurity point of view, what questions to ask, what controls to put in place, that's all available. It's just helping people know what's out there, asking the kind of questions that they need to ask to kind of be more intelligent and confident consumers, and that's where we need to get to. Okay,
so yeah, that's great. Looking at the policing and the consumer side of things, then Amelle, if we apply that to supply chain and that supply chain management in practice, how do you find it to actually identify and find those risks and then prep people to deal with it?
As Andrew mentioned, in fact, it's important to do a risk analysis. So cyber should be at the same level as modern slavery or any of the financial checks that we've got to do with any of our supply chains. So it's very important to understand the services that your supply chain can provide you and see how it would impact us should they get a cyber aspect. One of the points, in fact, that I wanted to also raise, more of the risk that we all have is more about coming from employees. Our employees, in fact, could very easily click on an open a document and that has been corrupted. So one of the crucial bets, in fact, for our procurement team, but the wider business, is educating our employees on the risk that might occur is quite crucial, and it's important that they are more aware of those risks that could happen. So we launched a campaign and where we were displaying different posters across all of our different projects and doing a compulsory training course as well, named Cyber and Me, but to try and raise, as I said, more awareness on the new people that are joining our teams, but also on an ongoing basis to make sure that the people thought twice before actually clicking on something, because the emails become more and more clever, in fact, in the way that they are being sent, and we just need to be able to make sure that we protect our business.
So that seems quite, again, coming back to getting the basics right and just making sure people are aware. It seems quite simple if you put it in those terms. but how can you actually make sure you are compliant? How do you measure your compliance through not only your own organization, but also through your supply chain? Because more and more of these incidents are happening not within your company, but further along down the supply chain, where you have so much less control over their systems and processes. How would you approach that with your suppliers?
So internally, we have gone through, in fact, the ISO 27001 that gives a very good framework, and also the Cyber Essential Plus certification. And we are currently working on our strategy to work with our supply chain partners and bring a risk factor to the journey. We also are planning to do a cyber awareness webinar at the end of May for our supply chain, because nearly 70% of our supply chain are SMEs. And as Andrew said, unfortunately, they do not have the support of an information security department within their businesses. And within the event, really, we want to be able to make them more aware, share the best practices, and as Andrew mentioned, all of the free resources that they can receive via the National Cyber Security Center as well. So within, for example, the best practices, it's aligning themselves and their own supply chain with the 4-tier approach of the National Cyber Security Center. And the 4-tier approach are 1, understanding the risk; 2, meaning that ensuring that they establish the control; 3, set up, audit, and review the plan that you've put together; and 4 would be more about continuous improvement. Also ensuring that they document their IT and cybersecurity policies, making sure that also there is a process to report cyber incidents and test their response to cyber attacks. And as I mentioned earlier on, educate all employees of a risk of cybercrime. And also we're pushing more and more the use of multi-factor authentication where possible. So for example, on our DocuSign, we're trying to set it up to ensure that the documents get received by the right person, and potentially for them to align themselves with the Cyber Essentials and Cyber Plus. Once we feel that the supply chain has a better understanding of cyber risks within their business and will be able to sort of look if they can also sign up and ensure that they sign up to the Cyber Essential standard or Cyber Essential Plus if they are providing services that are more critical to our business.
Thank you. And yeah, there's a lot of information there. We'll definitely share some of these links and some of these resources as well. So Michael, do you have any tips for, how you can improve your compliance, or just even start to measure your compliance through your supply chain?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. I think just this discussion, you can get overwhelmed pretty easily. There are some basic steps we can do, but it's also hard to not necessarily know what those steps are. So I think Amelle's point of having a risk assessment done is a really good starting point, because they'll come in and they'll find, where you might have some controls that are weak. And as you understand that process, you can start vetting other people and other suppliers and follow that same process with them and ask for their documentation and help them become stronger. And I think as we do that, it improves everybody. We all become a little bit better, a little bit stronger, and it also holds companies accountable. And I think that's one reason why it's been fun working with Avetta, where they do regulatory and compliance. I mean, that's kind of their forte for making sure people are being physically safe and they're doing smart things. And we need to just help people be digitally safe as well, cyber safe.
Absolutely. I'm just gonna, move on to the next question here. So what's your suppliers and your customers' auditing capability like? What responsibility can you actually put on, employees, suppliers, customers, like you said about raising awareness? And I mean, we've all received maybe a text or an email and not necessarily checked in advance. And sometimes we're lucky, sometimes we're not. But, how much of that responsibility can you put on others along organization? And yeah, how can you improve auditing capability on that? If I can come back to you again, Michael.
Yeah, it's tricky, but you see in like the SolarWinds breach, they're just as responsible for your data as you are. And I think it's absolutely fair to go through an auditing process with them and to say, hey, send us your certification, send us proof that you're secure. And our clients, we work with some very large clients, and they have very high standards, and they want us to show them that we're secure. And it makes sense because we house their data, we house their supplier data, and so we have an obligation as a company to make sure we're safe or safer than everyone else. And they have an obligation to be safe because a lot of them are working with clients as well. And so again, it comes back to that. I think it's just helping each other improve and become better. And I think you absolutely have every right to audit and hold them accountable. And if they're unwilling to do that, I mean, it's a good indication that it might be time to find alternative solutions.
I think, yeah, sometimes the auditing is tricky with maintaining those relationships as well with your suppliers and your partners. Amelle, have you had any experience with this side of the actual auditing?
Well, yes, so usually we do always, because we are ISO 27001, there is a certain process, and we've got some documents that we ask our supply chain also to be able to ensure to they fill in and provide the different reports. But that aspect of the business is also being done directly by our information security team. In fact, we're doing it. But I just mention that we must all obviously take responsibility for the protection of our clients, because as I mentioned earlier, we provide facility services to our different sites and etc. And all of the assets of our clients are very important, and it's important that we do take personal responsibility and look after it. Mm-hmm. But also what we want to ensure is that if there is a problem, then our supply chain does come forward to us so that we can act upon it straight away. So it's important that if there is a problem, the supply chain is open in discussing it and sharing it with us to be able to deal with it.
Yep, absolutely. So Andrew, do you have any advice on how you might go about actually the capability of managing and auditing now?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because there's a lack of skilled staff out there. There's a lack of understanding out there. But and you probably won't be amazed by what I'm going to say, but we should be amazed at the number of companies that purchase software or other services and don't even have data processing contracts in place, don't set any security standards or expectations in place, and are then surprised when things go wrong. And we've learned, not so much in reference to that, but we've had some. In terms of our own policing supply chain, we've had some huge incidents in the last year, which are a matter of public record. We had a company called Eurofins who actually they're a private company, but they provide probably nearly 50% of the forensic market share that they have for all things forensics in investigation, whether that's digital forensics or kind of what we would describe as wet forensics, DNA and fingerprints, blood, that kind of stuff. They got hit by ransomware. Well, if that had continued for longer, then we would have started losing cases at trial, because we're no longer able to get that. There are strict timescales, particularly when people are in custody. For you to get that evidence to court. Well, if you've lost all that evidence because you can't access it anymore, that has real world impact for us. So we've probably not been as focused on the supply chain as we could have been or should have been, or some forces have been very good, other forces less so. So that was a real eye-opener for us, but actually turned into a really positive experience, because we were able to get everything back and there was no criminal justice impact. But it was brilliant in terms of board awareness, because every chief constable in the country was running Gould groups about how the heck are we going to manage the impact of all these criminals suddenly walking out the door, and all these victims are pulled at the terrible service that they're getting, because it's not police failure, but we'll be held responsible for it, we'll be accountable for it. So, and there've been other less public incidents. We've had a very large scale national defence lawyer or the defence solicitors firm who've been compromised and had a data breach. Obviously, I won't name them, but they're in possession of some pretty unpleasant material. You probably won't be surprised to hear. Now, if that's out in the wild, as it were, that's some very difficult conversations with victims to say these pictures or these videos are out there. Now, we've got no responsibility to look after the defence, But actually, is that part of the broader criminal justice supply chain? Yeah, absolutely. Our own police federation, which is our trade union, they had the same problem last year, or was it the year before now? And potentially all of our personal data could have been compromised. Well, do we really want criminals turning up at our home addresses, those of us that work in sensitive roles? No, absolutely not. Do police forces have a responsibility to protect those organizations? No, but we kind of have to. So that's been a real eye-opener. One thing we have done, I think, really well in policing is we've effectively accepted we can't, there's 43 forces in England and Wales, we can't do it 43 different ways, 43 times. It's not efficient, it's not effective. We don't have enough staff with the right skills. We don't have enough resilience when we do have the good staff. So let's crowdsource it. So what all the chiefs agreed was we will top slice all of our policing budgets and we will build one national management centre, one SOC for policing, more and more national technology procurement. So 43 forces, one system, moving towards, we're not in a world of single platforms yet, we're a long way from where we need to be, but there's been some huge step forwards, and we've employed some really good people, some really good capability within the National Management Centre. And you might have a small number of really capable people, but if you bring them all together into one space, even if it's only virtually, and they're making sure we're hitting the right standards in every area in terms of our kind of information assurance and cybersecurity within policing, because our data is pretty sensitive, we feel like we've got a fighting chance of getting it right. And we look around a lot of other organisations, and we're now, not that long ago, we were probably poor as everybody else. We're probably streets ahead of most organisations now. Still a heck of a long way to go. There'll never be enough resource. We'll always need to do more. But at least we've got enough good people who know what they're doing, a good plan and some investment. And by crowdsourcing that, we're getting some real benefits in terms of improvements in efficiency and effectiveness. Now, we're not competitors as police forces. We are competitive, but we're not competitors. So there is a difference. So it's quite easy for us to come together and collaborate in that way. Cross-sector for a lot of private sector organisations, that's going to be very hard. But certainly public sector, there's no reason why local authorities can't do that. There's no reasons why other parts of the public sector can't do that. We've all got limited budgets, particularly going forward as we come out of the pandemic. So we've got to be a lot cleverer and more innovative. To get more better kind of value for taxpayer money. Why have 20 organisations all buying the same thing at a poor rate? Let's club together once and negotiate these prices down, which is what we're starting to do. So there are opportunities to do it cheaper, but actually much better. And if the police can do it, there's no reason anyone else can't do it.
That's a great point, and actually that's a great segue into the question and answer session, because we have had a specific question about that come up from someone in the audience. So please do, if you have any questions about what's being discussed, please keep sending them in and we'll get through as many as we can. But yeah, someone specifically asked, is there a role for procurement professionals to collaborate and communicate with their competitors, or even with people they're aligned with and similar organizations in their sector? Obviously, if you're worried about data sharing, is it worth sharing insights on attacks, things like that? Amelle, what do you think about that?
I think it is always good to be able to share, because I don't think that anyone is how can I say the best, but just being able to share makes us stronger. But there are certain elements, obviously, that might need to be kept confidential. But I quite like, as an example, just on the sustainability supply chain school. It's I don't know if you know it, but it's on sustainability, and a lot of different companies that are competitors that are getting together to improve their supply chain with their sustainability performance. So maybe it's also a possibility to do that for the cyber side.
Yep, I think the info sharing is definitely really important, especially as it's not exactly new. It's not a new phenomenon, but it seems to come up in cycles every few years, and actually, we have another question here, and we have touched on it already. But when it comes to, someone said, when it comes to having those conversations with suppliers about auditing and also just getting them on board with your practices, how do you actually start those conversations if you do have a concern? So perhaps if your relationship isn't perfect, or perhaps, you know, if you have spotted something you're not sure about, what would you do then? How would you approach it?
On this side, I would say even before you start working with them, you should have ensured that within your agreement, you've got a clause that enables you to do audits, so that you can do audits. And as I mentioned about modern slavery and other things, but also on cyber. And just being able to, I like to be able to work collaboratively with my supply chain, and just being able to explain to them that it's not we just need to be able to ensure that we're having the good best practices within our supply chain. And if we can support them, if we are a large group and are able to support them in improving some of their processes after the audit, then that's what I would sort of suggest to be able to offer them.
Yeah, that's a great. Michael, do you have any tips for anything you would do to actually get people on board?
Yeah, I think to piggyback off that, if you're already under a contract and are concerned, there's a lot of security certifications that businesses can have. If you're not in a spot where you can audit them, you could ask them to say, hey, you know, as part of our internal policy, we need to start making sure our suppliers are compliant with some type of cybersecurity framework, or have a cybersecurity certification. What ones do you guys have? And can you provide us a copy? And a lot of them will be willing to. They might require like a non-disclosure agreement to be in place, but a lot of them will send you that information, and you can kind of do a self-audit in that documentation. So there are ways around it if they're not willing to work with you directly. But I think in this day and age, with everything going on with cyber risk, if a company said they don't have any, or they're not willing to provide you that, I'd say that's a huge red flag and worth considering. So.
And what about if that's in your own organization? How would you, I mean, if you have concerns and maybe you don't want to be the whistleblower, but perhaps you want to raise some.
Yeah, it is tough. I know many companies have a way to report security potential incidents or actual incidents. And so I would see if that's available. If it's not, it is tricky because you want your business to be safe. And I think the easiest way to approach it is just maybe to find a listening ear to say, hey, I have some concerns about cyber risk. We do this, but I think we can do it better. Here's some concerns. How do we mitigate this risk? And it is hard because sometimes politics gets in the way, where people, you think you're stepping on toes or telling someone they're not doing a good job. But cyber is so hard to balance everything. And if there's holes, personally, I'd appreciate it if someone came to me and said, hey, right now we're emailing these docs. I don't think we should. What can we do about it? And we can have that discussion. In some ways we might say, we can email it because of this, and this, or you're right, we need to do this. So it is hard. You have to have some trust there. And if there's not, it puts you in a really hard spot. And I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
I suppose a lot of organizations probably have to move through that and find their own ways of managing it. But those conversations is a good way to start. So Amelle, do you think that there are some sectors that have more risk, that pose more risk than others? Or are there some supplier categories that are higher risk than others, have you found?
Yes, definitely. On our side, I think with the facilities management, as I mentioned, we've got, for example, lifts that might have a remote software in place, or I would say any software technology that you might be setting up within your systems. As Andrew said, making sure that you've got a lot of checks that have been done prior to taking on board the system. So for me, I think it's more any equipment that is that might be having an internet connection, in fact, within your business that could have impact, or with our clients' businesses.
So what if you don't have those? I mean, like a lot of this is built on hoping that you have those agreements in place, or you have the capability to audit in place. What if you don't have that already, but you're not setting up a new contract? What if you just didn't think of that at the time? What can you do?
And I would just use our negotiation skills with the supply chain, and hoping that you do have already a good relationship with your supply chain to be able to just ensure that things are being checked and etc. But as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of information on the National Cybersecurity Center, and there is quite a bit, as Andrew mentioned, also SME guidance and things like that, that if you take the time to actually review and understand a bit more, hopefully we'll be able to help you in setting it up and putting it in place within your business.
Thank you. I have another question here from someone. So in the panelist's opinion, the rise of technologies like blockchain and AI, everything that's been incorporated to make procurement a little bit easier, seems to be adding to cyber attack risks. What do you think? Is that really the case?
Not if you use, I would say, the right maybe supply chain to do. So if you've done your audit process at the beginning, I know, sorry that I go on a bit about that, but we do do a lot of checks, in fact, for any of the technology that we are using to ensure that we have done as many checks as possible that wouldn't impact us.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say that's the same, Andrew?
It's a really good question. It's like anything, isn't it? With new technology comes new opportunity, but also comes new risk. And I think when people are developing things, they're very understandably, they want to do it quickly because they want to get it to market as quickly as possible before the competitors do. And I totally get that. But they'll be focused on the good thing, the good purpose for which they're developing it. They won't be thinking about how could this be repurposed for something bad, because most people are good, they're not bad, so they're not thinking about how we can get hold of this and do something terrible with it. But often that kind of the security assessment or the security considerations always come at the last stage of the development of anything, often when it's too late and there's pressure to get it out the door, and then the consequences of that could be felt for years and years to come. So I guess going to blockchain specifically, what vulnerabilities does that necessarily create for you for an organization? For most organizations, probably not much, but it's just understanding the technology and how it impacts you in the way that you're using it and how others could exploit it. I think the implications of AI are far more worrying because everyone's talking about it like they understand it, when frankly nobody understands it. So an AI, I suppose, thinking of it really simplistically, AI will, if you put rubbish data in, you'll get rubbish results out. AI is not the solution to any business problem. Everyone says it, oh, it's machine learning, it's automated, it's AI. You don't know what you're talking about. You just don't know what you're talking about. Most organizations, even organizations that are developing this stuff, don't fully understand its potential or its risks. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Most of these things are clearly the benefits for using AI to do surgery better. Well, that's self-evident. But if you're kind of and I'm just bouncing around a little bit, but if the way you're developing stuff and your new applications aren't secure, then that's clearly really bad. We see kind of AI. My big worry in terms of technology from a law enforcement point of view is the rise of deep fakes. Everybody worries about deep fakes from a political disinformation perspective, and that is a real worry. But actually, if from a policing point of view and a justice system point of view, if you can no longer rely on digital evidence, images, audio as reliable evidence, then we haven't got any evidence. So nobody, so criminals can't be held to account for anything. That's really quite frightening. How can you identify when something's been produced through deep fake or not? So there are there are a lot of very there's a lot of really interesting research work going on along all these different areas. There's some amazing technology developments going on. I think people just need to understand when they're developing stuff how it can be used for bad as well as for good. And I think we've kind of all been saying it, maybe without totally articulating it. It's about us being intelligent consumers as organizations, just cutting through some of the sales chaff and just identifying, there's some real opportunity here, but none of this is a magic bullet. What are the risks that we're creating? How do we use it properly? And then training our staff to actually use it properly. So we get all the benefit for what we've paid for, but that we're doing it safely. But it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, it sounds like there's quite a need for procurement itself as a profession, and the people working here need to develop and invest time and training more on a lot of more digital skill, and not just in security but in general, like you were saying about AI, whether it's perhaps not necessarily blockchain but AI, a deeper understanding of what you're bringing into the business and how you're using it, perhaps.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're just going through some procurement at the moment. I mean, we're procuring stuff all the time nationally, but so we're just going through new procurement for the police cyber alarm. So that's a software tool. It's effectively a cybersecurity tool that we're promoting for all SMEs in the UK. If that's not secure and that gets compromised as a police product, then we're kind of finished in cyber. Who's ever going to talk to us again? The amount of time and effort that we've spent making sure the procurement is right to make sure the security is right, and all the other data processing, impact assessment, and contracts, and on all that other stuff is right. I think we like to think we've become reasonably expert, or where we haven't got the expertise, we have brought in the expertise, and we've spent a lot of money doing it properly. Yeah. Because if you set the standard right in the procurement, so the supplier's expectation is right from the off, and it's built to the right standard from the off. If you've got low standards, they'll deliver to low standards because they're delivering what you've asked them to deliver. So you've got to set the right standard from there. Procurement has such a big part to play in terms of the solution of a lot of this. So if we're getting the procurement process right and we're getting the right expertise during that process, so we're setting the right standard, an awful lot of this goes away because most suppliers, if they can't meet the standard, they aren't going to go for the contract. So you'll only have high quality suppliers getting off on the right foot, and an intelligent consumer as a business. I mean, that's the nirvana, but procurement professionals that understand that, and there are a lot of procurement professionals that do understand this and are doing this, and are, the upskilling in the last couple of years just in our world has been really, really impressive. People want to do a good job in any industry. People want to do a good job. It's just pointing people in the right direction to get the right information to deliver the right solution. So it's eminently doable.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop there because we're nearly out of time. Thank you. Sorry, one person messaged and we didn't get to your question. They just said Bill Gates famously said spam email will be eradicated within 2 years. That was in 2004. So good luck, everybody. We're not doing too badly.
Sure.
But thank you. I'll hand back over to Emma. Thank you so much.
That was fascinating. Thank you very much to Andrew, Amelle, and Michael. So I think we really had some high-level insights about what's going on, trends that you can expect to see, as well as some practical advice and guidance as well. So hopefully that was really useful to everybody. We've popped a link in the chat to the Avetta white paper to so you can get some more guidance on there, their report on cybersecurity. Also, as I said, this session has been recorded, so we'll share that next week. So feel free to share this within your own organizations or your colleagues, or as we said, collaborate with people in your sector. Share it even wider if that's useful. Hopefully it will get the conversation started and get more the conversation going about what you can do and how you can collaborate more to try and mitigate against some of these risks. So like I said, there's 2 more seminars in this series coming up. On the 13th of May we have Building Resilience, and the 24th of June we have Modern Slavery, and there's going to be information in the chat coming up on that soon. So thank you very much for attending, and thank you for all the questions that came through. It was a really fascinating conversation, and we look forward to seeing you next time.